Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of introducing our next guest speaker, Mr. Joe Mansour, who is a digital marketer and partner at FP1 Strategies and Plus Communications. Mr. Mansour launched and co-leads the firm's digital practice and has led digital efforts for numerous successful political campaigns. He has been recognized for his innovative and award-winning use of digital media. He has experience in all aspects of digital campaigning with an emphasis on digital-first, creative, interactive websites and targeted social media strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Joe Mansour.
Thank you so much. How are we doing today? So I was told that I am all that stands between you and lunch, which is a very dangerous position to be in. So we're all going to work on this together. We're going to have a great talk. You're going to have some great questions. Be thinking about them. And if we work effectively, hey, Daria, we're going to get through it. You're going to have food in your stomachs, and we're going to learn a little bit about the modern communication space. Let's see if this little slide works. Next slide. There we are. So before we get to where we are and what comes next, and we're also going to get, before we wrap this bad boy up, with some principles, some rules for success in the modern communications environment. Before we get there, let's start with where we've been. Let's talk about the communications environment back in the day. 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. If you wanted to get a message out on mass media, there were 3 big TV networks. Fox didn't even exist. CBS, NBC, ABC. The MASH season finale, 1983. How many people watched? 105.9 million people tuned in for that show. 105.9 million. Now, probably the biggest cultural phenomena of this year, Game of Thrones. Okay? Game of Thrones, season 1 intro. How many people tuned in to watch a couple of weeks ago? I think I heard someone say it. 17 million people. There are more people living in the US now than lived in 1983, fact. But the media landscape is so much more fragmented. And I think everyone in this room probably knows this in their bones, right? We know this sort of intuitively. But as someone told me once, why do you preach to the choir? So you can get them to sing. So hopefully some of these facts, this information helps arm you, educate you, so that you can think strategically about the shifting landscape and how we need to communicate in it. So, landscape is fragmented. There's more choices than ever before. We're going to get into more of that. And in order to get a message out, we have to think beyond some of the traditional channels that we've been accustomed to. Next slide. Clicker. Who knows who that is? Walter Cronkite. A 1972 poll showed Walter Cronkite to be the most trusted man in America. You might have heard that. More so than President Nixon at that time. Now, a new Gallup poll that I just saw came out, said just 45% of Americans have trust in the news media, the mass media. That is actually an increase from about 2 or 3 years ago, when that number was 32% in 2016. So it's increased. But, and this is interesting to me, when you look at just millennials, 30 and younger, the number is 33%. 33% of millennials say they trust the mass media. What is going on here? Again, if you've been paying attention to the news, this probably isn't a wild shock that people have lost trust in traditional institutions, including the media. But what that means is that if we want to reach our audiences, we need to go beyond that. We can no longer just think in how we're going to talk to traditional media. Why? Because they are not as trusted as they were. 2, their reach is less. So we have to go beyond that. We have to use other channels, other influencers, other avenues to get our messages out effectively. Let's see if I can make this work. Mad Men. The good old days. 30-second TV ad was king. Did one piece of creative, had a brilliant pitch, had a few drinks, wrapped it up, launched that ad, ran it for half a year, was out of the office by 3 into the golf course. Now, digital ad revenue has broken $100 billion in the US 2018, $100 billion. That's a 21% increase from the previous year. That number's only going up. We're going to talk more about digital advertising as we go. But again, theme of this, the landscape has shifted, and where it was simpler, maybe not easier, but certainly more straightforward to run an effective communications campaign, that has changed. Print newspapers. Look at everyone reading. Everyone read their local paper. Newsrooms thrived. It was a great business to be in, running classified ads, print ads, etc. Now, this was just in a Wall Street Journal about a week ago. Read this to you. Nearly 1,800 newspapers, 1,800 newspapers closed between 2004 and 2018, leaving 200 counties with no newspaper and roughly half the counties in the country, in the US, with only one, according to a University of North Carolina study. So, piling this up. Reach is less. These newspapers are going out of business. How do we get the message out to the people we need to reach and influence? Some of the channels that we were traditionally going to no longer exist, right? So I've painted a pretty dark picture. Not fun. Where are we now? This is a photo of St. Peter's Square in Rome. The one at the top was when the previous Pope, Pope Benedict, was announced as the new pick, not nominated, I'm trying to think of the term, 2005, about 14 years ago, not that long ago. In less than 10 years, when Pope Francis was announced, it's a sea of cell phones. What happened? iPhone came out 2007, Android, etc. We are now in the social media age. I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I look at that, and I'm continually amazed. Here's the stat. 95% of all Americans own a cell phone. Completely ubiquitous. And it's particularly pronounced with our youth. 28% of 18 to 29-year-olds have a smartphone and no broadband connection at home. And then this is something that I heard that always sticks with me. A third of polled Americans say their cell phone, their smartphone, is their most prized possession. More so than their wallet, their picture of their sweetheart, it's their cell phone. So this is the world we live in. Now, what are they doing on their cell phones? Everyone's using social media, right? This is a chart that shows social media usage by demographic. The topmost line, 18 to 29-year-olds. Now, I'm focusing there because I understand that's a big focus for, Army recruiting, et cetera. But it's not just the youth that are on social media. It's everybody. It's everyone. But numbers don't lie. Most popular social media channels in order of use, this is for millennial age group, is a little different for others. YouTube, we consider it social media, which we'll call it that for the purposes of this. Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter. Now we're just talking about millennials, 18 to 29. What about Generation Y, what comes next? Show of hands. How many people have heard of TikTok? Oh, wow. That's great. How many people are on TikTok? Fewer. I was at a digital media awards show in New York on Sunday. One of our clients got an award for their design rebranding. And I was sitting at a table with, I never knew this was a job profession until Sunday, a TikTok influencer who told me, lovely woman, she's a gymnast from California, who has 1.8 million followers on TikTok. TikTok, for folks that aren't aware, it's the hot new social network. It's sort of like Vine, if people remember that. Short videos set to music, very viral, very engaging. And I asked my new TikTok influencer friend, who follows you? She's like, oh, well, 7 to 17-year-olds. And I was like, okay, got it. But then I thought, they're going to be the next people who join the Army, who we hire for our agency, or that we need to influence. And these are the channels that they're using right now, which sort of boggles the mind to me that, Facebook, already passé to the younger generation, Snapchat's going to be old news. So my question that I face when we think about with our clients and I put to you is, are we keeping up? Are we paying attention? How are we going to leverage these new channels to reach the audience that we need to reach now and in the future? So this is the counterpoint to the first slide. We had 3 channels back in the day, the good old days, right? Big 3. This is the digital video ecosystem now. Thank you, cord cutting, right? 2018, 33 million cord cutters currently in the US. This is people who have ditched cable and are only watching digital video. That's up 6% from 2017. And according to one study, it's expected to reach 55 million people by 2022. Whether it's Netflix, Hulu, YouTube TV, Prime Video, all of the networks that are cutting the cord. Disney Plus announced. There is so many channels out there with so many different devices, and this is the landscape we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be able to communicate to, as opposed to going to 3 broadcast networks, running our 30-second ad and calling it a day. It's bewildering, but this is the new face of what we have to deal with. So that's the present. What's coming up next? Well, really, this is already here. Facebook just announced new VR setup, new Oculus tools. In 2019, 42 million people in the US will use virtual reality, and 68 million people will use augmented reality at least once a month. What's the difference? Virtual reality, sort of full-on headset. Augmented reality, well, you've probably already done, whether you're using a Snapchat filter or a filter in Facebook Messenger. Incredibly popular, lighter weight, probably going to be even more robust. So my challenge that I put to my team as we're thinking about stuff is, okay, we're going to make a 30-second video. We're going to make a 15-second video. What are we going to do with augmented reality? What about 360-degree video? How are we going to use this medium, which is only going to increase in popularity, to create engaging content that people want to interact with, want to share, and sort of drives our clients' messaging? That's the challenge for the future. What about chatbots? What about artificial intelligence? Everyone's heard the buzzwords. How do we use that? Well, you're probably already using it. Nearly 3 of 4 consumers have already interacted with chatbots. And they're only going to get smarter. Right now, they're relatively dumb, basic conversations, but it's only going to get smarter. And one of the principal ways we're sort of engaging with that is voice assistants. Siri, Alexa, Hey Google, etc. One study says 50% of all searches are going to be done using voice by 2020. It's in a year. What's your voice strategy? How are you thinking about that? How are you going to create your content so that it can engage the way people are going to be consuming your information in the near future, or now. Everyone's heard of 5G, I'm sure at this point. Show of hands, how many people have heard of 5G? Everyone's heard the buzzword, you've seen the ads. Every tech company in the world is talking about their 5G play, my clients included. What's it mean, just the 5th generation of wireless? This is what I find interesting as I think about this. All of the cool social media that I've just talked about, that we've sort of gone on about, is a product of 3G and really 4G, some of the faster speeds. 5G, if the hype is to be believed, 100 times faster speeds. 100 times faster speeds, 100 times more devices connected in a cell area location, 5 times lower latency. That just means that the streaming will be more smooth, less glitchy, less interruptions. I've talked about VR, we've talked about AI. If you had polled smart people in 2001 about what was going to come next, you would not have heard, I think from most, all the apps that we have now. What's going to come with that new technology? You know, people throw out autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, et cetera. But there are going to be new communications technologies, new apps, new services that we're not thinking about, but are going to be powered by this faster speed, and we're going to have to get on board with, and we're going to have to figure out. And so that's the challenge that I think about and that I put to you to think about as well as communicators. What's coming next? We know what's right in front of us, but what's coming next that we're going to have to learn, deploy, and utilize to get our message out? So I say rules here, but really I think of these as 5 principles, 5 guideposts that our firm puts into practice with the projects we work on. And I share with you because I think that they can be helpful as you sort of navigate the digital media space, as you put together thoughtful and effective communications plans to get the word out. So we're going to go through each of these points. Integrated. So as much as I am a believer in digital media, which I am, I do not believe and we do not operate in a silo, in a vacuum. We're practitioners of an all-of-the-above communication strategy. The example I'm showing here is our work that we did with Charter Communications and their successful merger with Time Warner Cable about 3 or 4 years ago. And for this project, we were doing all the communications, the field team that's grassroots organizing in key markets, et cetera, earned media, PR, public relations, digital advertising, social media, but then working with all the other pieces of it. They had a lobbying strategy. The focus of this was to get regulatory approval from the Federal Communications Commission and different state regulators in about the 41 different states where Charter and then Time Warner had a cable footprint. Very big campaign, very complicated, but it was every piece aligned, working together to drive towards a common goal and objective. And I say that because so often when I see this, when I see campaigns that are run, I see a lot of different activity and I see misalignment where a press release goes out and only after it's out the door does someone circle back around and say like, well, we should put this on social media as well. Or did we update the website? Or, hey, do we need to notify our lobbying teams that we're up with advertising in this state? And as opposed to aligning on the front end and executing so that people have the information they need and then you're methodically executing throughout it, you're playing catch up and you're sort of failing to disseminate the information and failing to promote it effectively. So a fundamental principle, you can even call it sort of blocking and tackling of good communications, but one that organizations that I deal with all the time or I watch from our competitors, et cetera, frequently trip up on. Digital first. Thinking digital first. You don't have to be a digital guru to think, how am I going to leverage this with the channels that I have in front of me? This is an example of a spot that we did for a political race a couple of years ago, where we took the same spot that we're running on TV and tested all the different sizes, different screenshots, vertical video, which often does very well on social media. Thinking digital first. So when I'm in my projects and our campaigns, what I often see is a failure to think that. Often the first thing someone writes is, let's write the press release. Well, is the first play always need to be a press release? Maybe the first play or the first go-to tool is a tweet. Guess where all the reporters are on? Twitter. So when I say digital first, I mean thinking about the execution that you need to run. I mean thinking about the tools that you have, and then thinking, how do I take the content that I have or the message I need to drive and make sure it fits appropriately to the channels that I have, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, a blog post, etc. Thinking digital first. Move fast. Third principle. Speed kills. We no longer have a 24-hour news environment. We have a constant one. Whenever the president tweets, shows up on the news, everyone's responding. Do you have a rapid-fire response plan? What are you responding to? Are you ready to engage quickly? Are you listening to the conversation that is happening so that when something breaks, you are ready to respond? Are you monitoring your social media channels? Are you ready to engage? I think the best way to do this is to have your game plan set in advance. If you're expecting an issue to break into the news, have content pre-written. Have a social listening and a social media monitoring plan, which I know I believe everyone does have. But keeping your finger on the pulse so that you can react quickly and engage. I put the back piece, half of this up with purpose because I think it's so critical. Because the caveat that I often see in organizations is sort of mistaking motion with progress. And while you need to move quickly, I think it's very important that you understand how these tactics, how these channels are going to get the ball down the field for your organizational goal, whether it's educating the public, driving a message, reaching a core group of influencers. So you need to move quickly, you need to be ready to engage, but you need to also say, does this advance my goal? But sometimes if it doesn't, maybe you don't need to engage. Now I think the default should be ready to act, but the caveat's there. We're almost there. Get your questions ready. 2 more. When we do testing on what moves the needle for our content, our advertising, et cetera, the single biggest lever, the single biggest factor, not the audience targeting, the different platforms, the single biggest deciding factor of, is someone going to engage with our content, engage with our advertising? Are we going to see the sorts of return on investment we want, our clients want? Is the creative, the copy, the images, the messaging. And so putting an emphasis on that is going to yield the single biggest return on investment. This is an example of a campaign we did for the National Sikh Coalition, We Are Sikhs, to educate their fellow Americans about the Sikh religion and how they were proud Americans. They'd been facing a lot of discrimination and hate crimes, particularly after 9/11, and they wanted to educate people that wearing a turban is not a sign of anything but their religious values and their faith. We did a bunch of advertising nationwide. We did a full comprehensive campaign in Fresno, California, pre and post testing, and saw significant movement with our target audiences in Fresno, California, where there's a large Sikh community after all of this. But to us, the message, the creative, the branding, the content, the story was what drove the effectiveness of the campaign, not some of the other factors. So creativity. And the last piece is testing and measurement. So important. There are so many digital analytics tools available to us nowadays. There's analytics tools for all other channels too, but particularly on digital, there's no excuse. There's no excuse not to look at the data, not to review your campaign performance, to see what worked, what didn't work, how you can optimize, how you can improve, so that you either can change up your buy or change up your creative, or further improve it or optimize it. This is an example, this is a case study of some work we did earlier, late last year around the election. We partnered with Moat, which is an industry-leading sort of ad verification tool, to track invalid traffic, which is just bots, fake users, basically anyone actually not a real person that you want to see your ads. And then we looked at some major news sites, in this case CNBC, LA Times, Star Tribune, USA Today, Chicago Tribune, to see what portion of the traffic when we were advertising on those news sites was invalid, inaccurate, fake, et cetera. And this is important because in this case, what we often sort of think about the digital buying landscape, we say, oh, if I'm going to go and buy direct on a major newspaper site, that is a high quality premium placement. But in this case, we were seeing trust but verify, and the ad traffic that we were getting from there was not as effective. So I won't bore you with more Moat analytics, but the point is the metrics, the testing, and the tracking. So essential. So those are the principles. Let's review. Integration. Digital first. Move fast, but with purpose. Creativity kills. Testing and measuring. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Thank you for your time. Welcome any questions.
Thank you for your time. I'm Mike Lawhorn from Forces Command. On your third principle, move fast with a purpose, one of the challenges that we often have in the military is commanders or leaders want to do something quickly when maybe the best thing is to wait. And so that third principle for me is often decide fast with a purpose whether or not to move. And so what are some of the principles or processes that you've used with companies to help them decide whether or not they need to do something? Because there's a problem, and then there's whether or not a problem needs to be solved, because not every problem needs to be solved.
It's a great question. It's something that we work with, when we're working with Fortune 100 companies, large institutions, large organizations. They have a complex decision-making structure, and they have to work through it. So there's a couple of things we sort of work through and we sort of align on, and a lot of it is prep beforehand. So we're big believers in having as much prepared before you get into one of those situations, whether it's a response plan, a game plan. So a couple of sort of tactical pieces. First off, when we're managing social media channels for a client or a large organization or anyone, we'll put together what we call a social media response plan, which is like, okay, here's the different types of things that we're going to face. If it's a general positive comment or interaction, that's a no-brainer. Like, yeah, thanks so much, good to go. If it's a question from pre-approved FAQs, here's our pre-approved stuff, good to go. If it's like a troll who is never going to say anything positive about us and has no relevance, we're going to ignore it. And if it's someone who merits a response that we don't have a pre-approved, pre-drafted guidance, we're going to engage on that. Now, that's sort of like the run-of-the-mill stuff. I believe what you're probably talking and thinking about is, okay, the president tweets about my company, how do I respond? Well, for a lot of our brands, and this is something that we work through for some of our clients, there is actually, you oftentimes have an inkling that something like this is coming, right? The issues in the news, you have a sense that, hey, this might be coming. That's the time to prepare. Okay, what are we going to respond to? What are we going to potentially draft if this does happen? Is it pre-approved? Is it good to go? Have it all preset. And then you can engage. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it truly is. It just comes out of left field and you've got to jump on it. For us, that's really where social listening comes into play, and having a sense of, okay, this is breaking. How big is this? Okay, this story broke. It broke in the journal. That's a big publication. How much pickup is it getting? Okay, it's getting picked up by a few of these reporters that cover this issue. It's getting so many mentions. It's got 100 mentions. Okay, it's got some traction. We need to put out a tweet or a press release, but we're not going to go further than that because we think that will put more fuel on the fire. Okay, this tweet has got, retweeted by everyone in town. It's been picked up by senators and members of Congress. It's gone, quote unquote, viral. We need a much more aggressive response plan ASAP. And so that's how we try and think about it, where is the conversation going? The listening is very important for that. Traditional media monitoring, social listening, which is what we do a lot of as well. The two work together, they feed off each other. For us, when we set it up for our projects, we'll do, I say traditional, but media monitoring in the morning, first thing, stories break. Then we'll go around and do afternoon social listening, because what we typically see is people will get online, they'll get on Twitter, they'll react to the news, and they'll start to carry it forward. So that's a big piece of it. Hopefully that answers your question, sir. Other questions?
On your digital first slide, you said that you had tested which of those layouts was the most effective. I'm over here.
Oh, thank you.
On your digital first slide, you said you had tested which of those layouts was the most effective. I'm curious as to which one you found to be the most effective.
Those were running on Facebook. Vertical did well there. Vertical, text on screen. The challenge and the opportunity for these social platforms is it's constantly changing. So tests that we ran a year ago, we run it again and we find a different result because they're constantly tweaking their algorithms and they're constantly adjusting it. The other challenge that you face is sort of creative cost. So for us, we have to produce all of these spots and it takes budget to do it all. And so one of the things that we often are sort of working through is, okay, how much juice is worth the squeeze? And okay, I need to budget if I'm going to produce a 6, a 15, a 30, a minute, et cetera, all these different sizes. But if your principal buy is going to be on Facebook, and that's where you're running everything, then it's worth the investment to resize it for that. But yeah, vertical.
In general terms, what messages work well with the younger generations and the influencers that really do it? A lot of times we talk to commanders and they want to do things that really excite them. But then when we talk to them about what the audience is, they don't really get it. And we're trying to make sure that we talk to them about what's going to move the needle with the audience, especially the younger generation and those that influence them.
Yeah, great question. I think, so I'm going to caveat this and say, first off, I think it depends. And I say it depends because I was talking with someone else who was asking me a similar question in the political context. I think we often make a mistake when we sort of think of the younger generation as a monolithic audience, as a monolithic block. They're not, right? There's left, right. Some of them are interested in the military, some are not. Some of them watch Game of Thrones, some of them do not. And so while in general say, okay, yes, younger generations on social media looks for more sort of authentic content, more authentic, less produced, less overly scripted, that sort of a view. I think that's generally true, right? In terms of okay, a message about, that incorporates country music is going to do well. Well, not if they like hip hop, right? And so I think you've got to sort of say a little bit more granularly, who within that universe am I trying to engage? All of that said, I think, more colloquial, more engaging, more authentic, which is difficult, right? Sometimes, I think that's something that our clients struggle with the most. It's like, okay, I'm a large corporation. What does authentic mean? Well, I think in those cases, it's putting the faces, the people behind the organization front and center and letting them carry that message because they are authentic. So storytelling, as a way to sort of show that. And then I think the other part of it is, people relate to people like them. So putting young people front and center and letting them carry a message that people just innately find more relatable. I think those are sort of principles that work. I mean, I think it's hard to, it's like running an ad that's going to sort of engage or excite a millennial, but it's someone who's 60 years old delivering it. The messenger is not credible in that case. I hope that helps. Great. Those are great questions, by the way.
So I don't have a budget to do audience analysis, and so I use publicly available data that's produced by Procter & Gamble and Ford and companies that make all of this information available about their target demographics. Do you have any more recommendations for where I might be able to find readily available by data and insights from companies that make it open to the public?
What kind of data are you, just general sort of demographic? What kind of data specifically are you looking at?
So I've looked at some things that they've produced in terms of products and services by age and by geographic region.
I think there's a lot of good sort of news sources, sites out there that sort of cover the industry that I find useful. I find Digiday is a good publication that I often subscribe to that has good sort of industry trends on digital marketing. Axios Media Trends is an excellent publication as well that covers. It's a once a week, so that's a good thing to subscribe to. I really like what they do there. I'll give a plug out to another guy in the space, Michael Beach. I forget the name of his company. He has a great newsletter that he sends out that talks specifically about sort of cord cutting in digital media spaces. I think to one of your questions, a great tool that we like to look at for our projects is we'll go right to Facebook and Twitter, and they have audience insights available that are free that will show you, okay, here is more additional audience demographic data. It's in the advertising section. It's not within the page analytics section. But you can go and look at models of your own audience, of who engages with your page or your content. Or you can do a custom audience upload. If you have like an email list, we'll do this for projects. And you can run that email list into Facebook. It'll match back, and it'll show you a lot of interesting sort of consumer trends about age, sort of demographics, consumer buying habits, which I find very helpful for sort of getting a sense of your current audience. Facebook is good. Twitter, their data is less robust, but you could also look at that. Hope that helps.
So I'd like to dovetail off this gentleman, or the answer you gave him. You talked about finding the authentic voice, and that it's the people behind the organizations. Couldn't agree more. How do you convince CEOs, or in our case, commanders, to take that risk when the fallout is potentially so drastic if not done well?
Yeah. It's a good question, and I think, I try and be realistic. I think oftentimes in the digital space, there is sort of a sense of, just try everything, try anything, throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And I think with large institutions that have a real risk of that, sometimes the risk is not worth the reward on that. That said, I think there are certainly ways to control interactions and mitigate risk, though you can never eliminate risk. I'm often we're putting plans together for organizations, and I'll see someone say, there's no risk to do this. And I'm like, no. There is a risk. You can mitigate it, you can reduce it, you can control it, you can channel it. But the very nature is, you can't eliminate negative comments from the internet. Like, that's gonna happen. And you have to have a certain level of willingness to engage. The flip side of that piece, though, which I often find funny, is like folks are like, well, look, if I don't engage, I won't have anything negative happen. It's like, no. People are still going to say negative things about you. You're just not going to have your positive message out there, right? I once had a client who's like, I don't want to do any of this monitoring. I don't want to know any of this because I'm not ready to respond. And it's like, well, okay, you can keep getting pummeled online and you'll never know And I guess, ignorance is bliss, but it's still happening. I think on the content piece, so there's a couple of ways to break it down. And often, we sort of, you tier it out. You get them in the kiddie pool, and then they're a little more comfortable. They go into the full swim lanes, and then they can go into the deep end and, swim with the big kids. But on the kiddie pool side of it, look, you can create a 30-second video or a 15-second spot or just do a photo series of faces of your organization that you've controlled that content, right? You've produced it, it's on message, you've ensured it, and then you're gonna put that out, right? And yeah, you may get some comments interaction, but you have controlled the content that you have created. As opposed to saying, maybe a more advanced thing is, we're gonna get on Reddit and do an Ask Me Anything, where there is a much higher likelihood of negative fallback. Well, the first option, you just put the video out. You've controlled that. That's pretty safe, right? Versus doing a Reddit Ask Me Anything. God knows where that's going to go. So I think there are ways to sort of calibrate it and to get an organization on board with some of the easier pieces, the safer pieces. And if there is positive results, folks are happy, they like what they see, you can sort of move them deeper into the water. That's what I would recommend. Great. Okay. I think we've wrapped up questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mansour. We appreciate you being here. PA professionals, this concludes our morning sessions. Lunch is followed by some collaborative meeting time to allow an opportunity to network, check email, and visit the tables in the lobby. Our next session is the keynote address from the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. Please be back in here and seated at 14:05. Enjoy.